All right, I'll go ahead and kick things off, and we'll let people find their way in. For those of you who I haven't met before, my name is Elizabeth Beggins. I am the Maryland Agriculture Outreach Specialist for the Million Acre Challenge, which is a collaborative project with organizational partners that include the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, American Farmland Trust, and Future Harvest. And we have a goal of 1 million acres of Maryland agricultural land and regenerative practices by 2030. I also have my colleague Lisa Garfield with me today, who is with Future Harvest. Lisa, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm the research director for Future Harvest, and I manage Future Harvest role in the Million Acre Challenge, including leading the Maryland cohort of a large-scale soil health benchmark study developed by PASA Sustainable Agriculture.
Great. All right. We're going to see if I have success launching a poll that we have. My computer's been a little glitchy about it lately. This is just an opportunity for us to not only know who's in the room, but kind of what you're interested in learning more about. If you can't see the poll, you can add this to chat. The question is, questions are, which role best describes your reason for attending the event today? And what are you interested in learning more about? Whoops, that's interesting. While you're thinking about those things, I'll move on to just sort of this brief snapshot of some of the work that the Million Acre Challenge is involved with. Captured on this slide, the soil testing and benchmarking study that Lisa just mentioned, that is headed up by Pennsylvania Association for Sustainable Ag and managed by Lisa here for the Million Acre Challenge. We also have a number of farmer networking opportunities, including advanced learning circles and things like our monthly lunch and learns, which you're taking part in today. The main thing I want you to leave with today is that we are truly a farmer-focused initiative. We believe that farmers are the experts, and recognize that those of you who are doing that work are stewarding the land in the best ways that you know how, and we want to just help you move forward on that journey. All right. Everybody here's a farmer, except for one. So that's awesome. It is curious to me when a number of folks mean to be here, but then aren't able to join. It changes the dynamic of the conversation, but you guys are going to be able to have some really intimate time with our farmer today. Real quick announcement. If you feel like having your cameras on, great. If you don't, we understand. It does bring an intimacy to the room, so that's nice if you feel like you can do it. You can go ahead and add anything about yourself in chat that you want, especially since we have a small group today. We would love to continue to engage with you beyond this event today. I know several of you have attended a number of our opportunities, but if you haven't already taken time to follow us on social media, that would be quite welcome. The QR code on this next slide that I forgot to advance will take you to our subscribe and follow page on our website. So it'll give you a chance to just find all that information all in one place and take advantage of those opportunities. We do send out a monthly newsletter, which we try to fill with regional information, not just Million Acre Challenge information, anything related to soil health and regenerative ag that we think will be of value to our community. My email and Lisa's emails are at the bottom. As I mentioned in the beginning, we do have different organizations involved in the project, so our Our homes are different. I'm at CBF and Lisa is at Future Harvest, and you're welcome to reach out to either one of us. All right, Stephen Kraszewski, in case you're wondering how he pronounces his last name with all those consonants, is with Mason's Farm in Queen Anne, Maryland. He originated on a family farm in upstate New York, and then he went to Cornell University for ag education. Here in Maryland, he has served as a nutrient management planner for Maryland Extension and as a USDA NRCS conservation planner. His work has taken him to places that have given him an opportunity to learn about soil agronomics, soil biodiversity, row cropping techniques, and just day-to-day farm operations and the unique challenges that come with that. The Mason's Heritage team is working to reduce farm inputs, to maximize nutrient availability, enhance soil biological and ecological functions, and reduce reliance on tillage. The organic grain operation is part of the benchmark study that we've mentioned a couple of times. And Steve also participates in our small watersheds grant program, looking at purposeful cover cropping. He also participates in our Upper Shore grain producer farmer network. We are super delighted to have him with us today. And at this point, you get to hear less from me and more from him. We're going to be looking at these questions together. And Steve, at this point, I'm going to be turning the talking stick over to you. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Oh, well, you're very welcome. No, thank you for inviting me and thinking about me and what we're working on here at the farm in Queen Anne County. And yep, and thanks for all your help setting this up and all the help you've been giving me working towards the soil health, regenerative soil health, practices, and even in terms of funding and other things and opportunities. So it's been great for us. So just to get started, get rolling. There was just a transition which happened starting in 2006. My father-in-law, Bill Mason, basically there's three main reasons he had for starting that transition. First two, maybe obvious to some, not to others, but one was just to bring additional income per acre to the farm. It seemed like there's a point when he was using just conventional production techniques, using a local ag service dealer, and basically doing the field fitting and planting. They'd come in with the rest, do the top dressing, nutrients, pesticides, so it's herbicides, fungicides, insecticides. And basically what it boiled down to, even after a couple of years of poor weather, either a hurricane one year in the early 2000s, followed by a drought the next year, he seemed to be writing more checks than he was receiving. So they made the change, the decision to change, starting some acreage to transition to organic. And that's definitely boosted the income per acre. It's lifted the management as well, but it's definitely well worth the effort to see that income per acre go up and just be more sustainably, economically sustainable for this operation. Second one, another simple one, a safer farming environment. He was aware of all the chemicals that were being applied, and it's just with his family and his safety and safety of others, friends and family, that he just knew that this was a better choice to keep more peace of mind, to keep everybody safer, especially with it's just such a ubiquitous practice with all the chemicals being applied, even just around us. We're a little island here and a bunch of conventional farms. They're all great farmers and everything. It's just he made that personal choice to just have all that peace of mind and that safety. And probably the third one is, I get on the soapbox and I call it my apply, deplete, rinse, and repeat. That's how I've never gotten much into the conventional side of things. And I started helping Bill with his organic side of things. And I just see that constant vicious cycle that you apply your chemicals, deplete the soil, rinse it clean, spray it clean, and then you kind of repeat that over and over again. So I think there's a chance to move away from that.
Really nice. I am sure the lessons continue in any farm operation. That's always the case, but let's talk a little bit about kind of what you think have been the biggest lessons you've learned so far in relation especially to your farm's soil health management practices.
Yeah, well, I think the easiest one, that's a great question. The easiest one to answer for that question is probably that just because a transition to organic or being certified organic doesn't necessarily, equate building a soil health, or I joke around, Mother Nature coming back and give you a big hug. And even the organic regulations themselves, it's really strictly and very focused on, make sure you're not using any of those chemicals, those commercial chemicals and seed treatments, GMO seeds, and other, synthetic fertilizers. There is something called an organic system plan in an certified organic operation, although it's not much emphasis on it, I'd say. And when you're talking about, nature not coming back and giving you a big hug and building your soil health, it's mainly because tillage in a lot of ways is the mainstay of those available solutions to those agronomic challenges, just in terms of, say, planting conditions and weed control. But even for us, early on, the focus was, trying to use those short-term solutions with tillage to make it just through that season. That was our focus, just 1 year at a time. And like I said, that excess tillage to bury, break down the cover crop and all that residue, as well as control weeds. That was more like, in my opinion, looking back now, short-term shortcuts for us. But when you're talking about soil health and regenerative soil practices, you're talking about a long-term investment. Oh, and I think there's a couple more lessons I can talk about. We have an example I like to use is a lesson we learned. If we want to build our soil health, we have to match our management to it. And especially if you're talking about things we're applying to the soil, one thing we're working on is applying or inoculating our soil with, say, mycorrhizal fungi and even protozoa and other species to build up that soil diversity in the environment it's functioning in. But of course, disturbing that soil, plowing, tilling, it destroys that environment for the creatures, that need to transform that soil. And a good analogy is like the infrastructure in this country, like the highway system. If that's all broken, nothing runs efficiently. It's the same way in the soil. All those pathways, they're not connected, not communicating. It's just not a very efficient system. And probably another lesson learned there is adoption of tools that reduce the tillage. But that means a harder focus on the residue that you're leaving on the ground and trying to manage that alongside fertility. So instead of going down the field 3 or 4 different times with 3 or 4 different tools, the reduced tillage, you're either using one or 2 tools, or maybe 2 or 3 tools only once down the field, trying to perform all those other operations in 1 pass or maybe 2 passes. And so, the full tillage, fully incorporates all that biomass, your legumes for your fertility, your even small grain that was mixed in, and burying it, and it's releasing it and breaking it down once it's turned over. Now you're leaving it on top of the soil. You've got to figure out, what to do with it.
Steve, how long ago did you all start to incorporate strip tilling, which is what's going on in this image?
It's probably been going on in one way or another last 4 or 5 years, but in the last 2 years, so Cloud's last season and this season, is to actually scale it up more. Because what it basically boils down to, and if you don't make it a significant part of your operation, I'm not talking half your acres, and I'm not even talking half of, like, say, the corn side of things. It's just about 10% of our corn acres, but the point is, it still matters. If you leave a couple rounds out in the field, in the corner of the field, when you get busy, you tend to forget about that. But if you do, say, 40 or 50 acres, which is about, they said, 10% of our crop at any given time, any year, any season, then it matters, and you pay attention to it. You got to make it work.
That's really it's exciting. I told Steve how much I love this image too. It's just it just captures the essence of strip tilling quite well, I think. So let's talk a little bit about kind of how you gauge soil health and how you're focusing on that in particular. Yeah.
Well, for the soil health, it really starts, I think, with a well-established cover crop. If you want to get, as in our program, trying to get away from that tillage-based type of management in the field. And of course, soil health to me is about keeping those living roots growing in the soil and trying to minimize that soil disturbance. What kind of really opened my eyes was when I saw the report from the soil health benchmark study, was how many days in cover or living roots, living cover, let's say that could either be cover crop or the cash crop in the field for any given season or the entire year rather. And how we had well over 300 days out of 365 days of that cover. Yet there was still something missing because basically our soil health based on our soil sampling every year and the soil samples we were sending through to Cornell through the benchmark study wasn't showing quite the same, what kind of results, maybe I expect or want to see. So, I think, we're still doing the right thing with the cover crops and getting them early. It all depends on how you manage them. And I think moving away from even every other year having a no-till type of operation with just one of the crops, say just the soybeans rather than the corn, but trying to engage with reduced or minimum till or no-till, both of those years is probably really the key to it. Or that's where at least we're headed.
I wanted to back up. I had a question in my head that I failed to ask. You mentioned inoculating your ground, and I wondered if you might want to just elaborate on who you're working with for that and whether is it too soon to be seeing results?
The company is Mid-Atlantic Microbials, and we started partnering with them early 2021, and started with a program applying some products in the spring. Thought we noticed a result in just our cover crop. We just put it on top of the cover crop ground and thought we saw it. It just happened to be greener in I think we did like 10 acres, in a couple of different fields. We covered different types of managements to see, and just thought we saw a boost in the cover crop. So we decided to go along with it, and along with just applying these drenches, these teas and extracts, we're also getting soil samples pulled. And even from this, we had a workshop here in early September. They had some slides and they had the microscopes out. They pull the samples, they put them on a small, glass slide under the microscope. You could see the difference. You could see the mycorrhizal fungi, all the other organic exudates and organic matter in the soil compared to fields that hadn't been treated at all. So that's nice to see that check there. But I can also see out in the field how the ground works, and I can always start seeing some differences just by seeing how being in the field and working with the ground.
So I think that's a good segue into kind of talking about what new practices you're looking toward at Mason's Heritage.
Yeah, well, new practices that's just come along recently in the last year or two. We've been working on just maybe adjusting the rates of one of the two species, but adding crimson clover and even balanza clover to our rye, making a mixture instead of just doing a straight cereal rye stand. Which can work if it's well established and you get it in early enough, but sometimes you can't do that. And if you're a little later in the season, you need to have something, at least we found that having something else out there like the crimson clover at a lower rate of say 10 pounds an acre, we're planting, I think 150 pounds an acre of rye seed. But it performs a nice, I guess called the big word, synergistic result. They're very compatible and complement each other very well. Basically, you still have the rye in there for your best weed control, because as it grows up and heads out, it's very tall, 5 or 6 feet, produces a lot of biomass. It hangs around once you roll it down with a roller crimper, but also when you have the clover in there, it kind of intertwines and grows up kind of maybe halfway up the rye cover crop. But when you lay it down, even in maybe some thin spots where there's rye, or the rye's thin, I should say, that clover keeps things held down to the ground where you want it. You don't want anything popping back up. I think it helped us avoid roller crimping twice, which I've heard farmers do plenty of times just to make sure it's down and settled, terminated and laying on the ground. So it saves time in the field and even adds that biomass that I think we need to hold those weeds back long enough for the soybeans.
Steve, have you ever tried to frost seed it if you weren't able to get, because I know crimson doesn't do real well planted like in November. Have you ever tried frost seeding it over rye if you missed doing it when you planted?
No, we haven't gotten there yet, Aaron. Well, what I typically try to do if it's late in the season, I try to raise my drill. I'm going to put a little more of the large seed out on top of the ground, say a little bit of rye. As long as I usually bump my rate up a little bit though to compensate for that, knowing that something's going to get out it's going to be on top of the ground. But the other thing is we use an air drill, which kind of has its advantage. It can blow some of that seed out, and the smaller seed, like the clover seed, gets kind of blown up onto the fringes of that little trench for the seed. And when it gets closed by the closing wheel, it's usually in that top ½ inch, and can usually, and it's worked this year for us so far in some fields that were late. We were at end of November, and I can see it coming up. So we got a little lucky with the weather, but making that adjustment certainly helped.
Yeah, we were at the farm about a week ago, and that, or maybe 10 days, and that cover crop hadn't come up yet. So Stephen was feeling a little more anxious, not that far back. Would you want to elaborate a little bit, Steve, on your involvement with the Purposeful cover cropping program?
Oh, yeah, well, Purposeful cover cropping. Are you referring to like an actual like state program?
The
bonus cover crop program.
Yeah, the program that you're involved with the Small Watersheds Grant and Lisa and Sarah Hirsch. Yeah. Right. Okay. Just want to make sure we're talking about the same thing. Yeah, I know. Well, there's more than one program out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing I just want to say about that program is, of course, it's a nice little incentive, a monetary incentive per acre to try something new, but also that gives a little more flexibility too than some of the, say, the state program, or even if you're using like NRCS and EQIP money. Program, some of the kind of stringent, some of the recommendation for when to plant and when to stop planting, cutoffs for seeding certain species. They need to be, there's some revision that needs to happen there. And, there's a lot of other techniques. I just try to explain one to Aaron there, what we do if it's late. But that program, we're adding in new species, canola. We're going to see how that works, see if it can give us a nice taproot down through the soil, produce some flowers for some pollinators, and also just add a little biomass that maybe hangs around a little longer than the clover that's going to be out there with it. We're anxious to see how it works. It's up in one field, looks nice.
So I'm realizing I've missed an opportunity to show off the beautiful pictures of your crimson clover cover crop. Not only is it a workhorse, it's really pretty.
It's a nice crimson shade. You got that right.
Yeah. So let's see, let me back up here real quick. The picture on the right here, is there a roller crimper somewhere in that? On
the right, correct. Yeah, that's a pea with rise. That's a field with rye and peas mixed in. Actually, we rolled it down to try just no-till some soybeans, and it was just at an 8-acre field, and something thought we'd try, give it a shot. It had its advantages, it also had its drawbacks too. One thing is the peas, when you run them over and crush them, they really tend to disappear. Clover's a little different. It tends to lignify when it matures. The peas, they keep growing, and they're very succulent all the time. And especially the turn row, when you turn row, we do our turn rows first. This is the perimeter of the field, and then going back and forth to do the lands to fill in, turning around extra times on the turn row, all that, any of that biomass from the peas tend to kind of just disappear. So it just crushed it, and it just senesced and dried up.
So you're dipping your toe into vetch.
Yeah, I always say vetch gets a real bad rap because of the hard seed, which it does have. Although I think it just must have been a couple folks with got into it real late or terminated it real late for whatever reason. And of course, then you have vetch seed all in your field. But we had a really good year with our. We had seeded it fall 2021. And turned it over on dryland corn this year, produced very well. One thing we like to make sure we try something new, we try to measure it. Always try to keep track of it, compare it to what we're already doing. So on the left there, you can see the height of the vetch, it's still growing. I really like the feature about like vetch and or the peas, as even if it starts to flower and mature, it's still growing, it's still producing. Whereas crimson clover, basically about the first week in May, it's done. As soon as it starts to head, that crimson flower comes out and emerges, you've got about a week before you should terminate it, because then it starts to get tough. And what that means is if it's tough, it won't break down when you turn it under, and you need that fertility for your corn crop.
But I think I jumped ahead of a topic here, because here's your Purposeful cover crop slide.
Oh, it's all relates. Trust me, no problem.
And Here you can actually see the roller crimper.
Yeah, right. Well, then, when I say purposeful here, yeah, there's that roller crimper knocking down. And if you look kind of closely at that left slide, you can see kind of light bands, within that 20-foot width of it. That's actually where that was strip tilled the first time, early in the spring, say mid-April. And what we're doing is coming back and finally rolling it down, terminating it. And what we'll do is using guidance on the tractor and on the implement, which is the strip till tool, it'll pull right through that original template that we started over a month ago. And it basically just cleans up that road. There's not a lot of material there to get out of the way, or there shouldn't be, let's say. There really shouldn't be that material in the way if it all lays down and works out as planned. That definitely had its challenges. I think we'll get to discussing that a few slides later on. And also, one thing is to note, most of that you see being rolled down is staying on the surface, which is good for weed control. Just the fertility seems to suffer, and that's one thing we noticed with this new technique, and it's something we have to work on.
So believe it or not, Steve, we're already at 12:28. We do tend to tack on an extra 15 minutes or so on these lunch and learns because we can't quite get through all the material in the time that we have. But if folks need to hop off right at 12:30, I want to give you a chance to kind of just throw in a thought about kind of how you expect to move forward with your soil health management. And I feel like this slide might be a good way to present that.
Oh yeah, well, with the soil health management, it's iterative. As I call it, an iterative process. You take what you already know, what's working, or that you thought worked, and then you just try to build on that. You try not to reinvent the wheel if you can help it. And that's the way it's kind of been with, like I said, the no-till. We used to actually do all drilling. We drilled all of our no-till soybeans, but realized that's you either get a good stand or you don't, or you get a bunch of weeds too, and you don't really have a plan B. There's no cultivating. So we went to a planter which can deliver the seed much more accurately. And then adding on to that, we needed something that would do better in a thinner stand when we were planting later in the fall following a corn crop, because beans would be the next year. And we started toying around with clover. I think we put down 20 pounds of clover an acre the first time. That was way more than we needed. So we knocked that down by half, saved a little money, and still had a great stand, a lot of biomass. It did its job, had that, like I said, they're a good companion crop, the two of them, for the no-till soybeans. And the picture on the right there showing, trying to work on some of that in-row fertility. Working on actually, instead of pulling a separate pass with a tank and dribbling some organic fertilizer on, well, maybe we can do that with the strip till. We can hook it up with a pump and a nurse tank to feed the fertility early on when we're not busy, say that first pass in April, as I mentioned before. And hopefully that will be, the crop will have that to latch onto when it's growing and give it more of an advantage, and help with the yield and help with our it always helps with the income per acre too, of course.
So I love this slide.
The corn or the weeds?
Just hooray, the corn came up. Now what? Daryl and Justin, if you all are willing to stick around with us for a few more minutes, we'd love to have you. And Kaylee, you too. You fell off my window there, so I didn't see you right away. If we're good to keep going, then we'll just press on.
Yeah.
And let me, Stephen, give you a chance to reflect on this thought.
Right. Well, what worked? The corn came up. You don't have a crop if it doesn't come out of the ground. And we struggled with that before. We finally moved our planting a little bit later in May. So say from early to mid-May to the last week and a half or week in May. And big reason for that was the seed corn maggot. And we have a tool, though, to predict when that pest will be in its certain larval stage, its feeding stage. And so, but the only problem is we had to find a cover crop. We always using the crimson clovers for many years on the farm and using it for everything, but it matured too early. I mentioned it matured by the 7th, maybe the 10th of May. And by the time we're planting, if we want to plant late for this strip till, it's past lignified, it's tough. Any fertility was going to add to the crop for that season. A lot of it can be lost, or at least that's what we think. So the peas kind of came in and they grew very well. The only problem is, I said that what worked was the corn came up, we got the timing right, but the rank peas grew everywhere, laid down in different directions because of weather, every which way, and created issues for rolling and then strip tilling and trying to manage all that crisscross, mashed up rank growth. We managed to do it, but we got a lot of straw in between the rows, and managing that was difficult, especially with a flamer. That's dry straw and it wants to catch the field on fire.
So how do you think you'll prevent that same thing from happening again next season?
Well, we made an adjustment this season, planting. We knocked down the peas a little bit on the rate, but we bumped up our clover and even added not just crimson clover, but balanza, which is very similar. They say even balanza might be able to outperform or outperform growth that the crimson can, but I think they're pretty, as far as I'm concerned, pretty equivalent. By adding those two species in, backing off on the peas, I think we'll get at least the same amount of fertility. We kept the rye the same. It's a big mixture, 4 species in there. But you know, if we're taking away one thing, and that's our part of our fertility, we need to add something back, the clovers. So I think there'll be less rank growth. We'll try to get in there a little earlier, keep an eye on it. And then hopefully everything rolls down the direction we want to, like the roller does. And it kind of stays green longer that way if it's not crisscrossed and not sliced apart by the strip till tool when it comes through and cuts those ends off and creates a bunch of straw you have to deal with. I like it stay rooted in the ground if possible.
Steve, did you come in and flame that strip of corn, or the corn with the 2 leaves on it and kill those weeds without, I guess you would have had to do it on a dewy morning.
Yes, 9 o'clock was my cutoff, Aaron.
Yeah, that's what I see too.
Beyond that, I was getting off the tractor too many times and stomping out little fires, or a couple of times almost got away from me, just had to start driving over it every which way. It was just, luckily I did that the beginning of the field and just said nuts to this. But what I really needed here, Aaron, was earlier weed control with, say, a rotary hoe. Of course, I don't want a rotary hoe between the rows because you're just going to get wrapped up with straw. So figuring out a way to just take off the rotary hoe wheels, between the rows, keep 2 or 3 focused on the row running down the field would have been great, especially for grass. Now that's the cockleburs, that larger weed you can see next to the corn row there. That's tough to flame. It's very hard to kill with the flame. Any damage you do to it, you're doing the same to the corn, and you just can't quite really get ahead of it. It's cultivation. It's a bigger battle with it. At least that's what we found. But I was able to use sweeps, 20-inch sweeps between the rows and take care of most of those other weeds. It's right in the row I've got to focus on.
Have you thought about, I'm thinking about this year, doing 2 flamings like spread apart, like, I've talked to a weed scientist who was saying, well, that way you get rid of a lot more weeds. I mean, you're essentially doing 2 waiting for a flush, flaming again, and then flaming at maybe this stage. So but it would take a lot of timing and a longer drawn out process to do it.
Well, yeah, well, I said, basically the corn there and the weeds they kind of came up about the same time, actually. I think the corn came up a little slower than I expected, but when it did come up, like I said, it was a good stand, but had to flame when there was the corn there with the weeds. And actually, it's that corn's a grass, and so's the foxtail, the small stuff around the corn there. Flamed it on top, killed the top of it, but just like the corn, the growing point's still below the ground, and it still came up afterwards. And I tried to get out there later when the corn was the kind of that last cultivation stage, but I mentioned the problem with the straw, and I'm later, now you're talking, later part of June. I just couldn't flame it. It would just catch everything on fire.
Yeah.
I had to let it go.
Yeah. I was thinking of going backwards and flaming like mid-May, and then flame again at that stage. So you're getting 2 weed flushes, but you're not, rotary hoe would stir up new weed seed, where the flamer you would never disturb that. Well, you would at planting, but just right.
Yeah, it would have been nice to have that chance with at least the rotary hoe to run it through the field, though. I think that would have given us a little better control.
Do you both want to mention what flamer you're using, and maybe we can capture that for people who are watching this later, and maybe also put it in chat if we have a chance? Aaron, what are you using?
Yeah, I mean, it's a home built one, but it's a Red Dragon kit. I use the bigger torches, just 1 per row. So I don't cross flame. I think Steve's got the cross flame set up.
Yes.
Right over the row with it kills pretty reliably 8 inches wide, you know, what the actual kill, the flame goes a little wider. It depends on the size of the weed, what it's killing on those outer edges of the band.
Right. I think what Aaron really has there is, you know, with his style there, you know, can be kind of a preemptive flame to get that early flush of weeds even before the crop comes up. Right, Aaron?
Yeah, or corn, I'll do it at that stage you're at, or even later, but I'm kind of go back and do it when the corn's younger. I feel like it has a lot to recover if you let it get to 4 leaves. I think it needs to be like about that stage or earlier.
Yeah, we try to get, if it's just at that spike stage where there's really nothing unfurled yet, no leaves have started to unfurl from that small whorl, WHORL. But we usually do it after the corn comes up. It's usually most of our weeds, you know, anything that's coming up in the row, that's up by then. So, and doing it soon enough, the corn bounces back, the growing points beneath the ground and recovers fairly quickly. It's just, I think, you know, our standard weed control with the blind tillage, like the rotary hoe, I think would benefit the next time though. But yeah, that flamer, like I said, it's cross, say right in front of me is the row, comes on either side, kind of down at an angle, hits the tops of the weeds. Actually, the heat bounces off the ground at the base of the plant. If it's tall enough, say we're at the corn's 2 feet tall, and then comes up and burns the underside of the leaves. That's the way it was designed to work, and it seems to work pretty well if it's set right.
And what brand are you using, Stephen?
Same as Aaron's. That's a Dragon.
Gotcha.
He bought a kit, and we just bought it mostly assembled, except for the wings of the thing. It's an 8-row
Awesome.
machine.
Let's spend just a moment on kind of where you're going with other equipment additions or modifications.
Oh, yeah. I touched on it earlier with the strip till machine there, which is the larger picture there on the toolbar, the black piece of equipment there with all the row units. Of course, there's 8 rows there to match our 8-row planter. And what you have there is something that kind of does all the 3 tillage tools, 3 separate tillage tools in one. It you know, removes debris, it loosens the soil up, it cuts, it works the ground, and it smooths it back out. It's all one pass. It's kind of a nice tool. At least I'm getting better with it and getting used to it. Making certain adjustments this year, put those row cleaners on. They're kind of a sharp tooth design, serrated design there, better than straight fingers. They did a much better job keeping that residue out of the way. And like I said, when you go into no-till or reduced till, you gotta up your residue management game, so to speak, to try to deal with what's still on the surface. But we're going to try to add some fertility in the row while pulling that machine too. Maybe that can be done in April. We can avoid doing it towards planting when things are very busy, and you got to get the tool once more through the field, and then, you know, get planting. We can put the fertility on earlier, make sure it's delivered in the right place with the shank down 8 inches deep. I think that'll help our corn out a lot. Give it a little bit fertility boost that it really needs. And as far as next steps with, say, the cover crop, I already mentioned about the peas, backing off on those a little bit, adding the extra clover to reduce that lodging and that rank growth that we see. But also, and this was mentioned about the canola and the rapeseed that we're adding to the no-till soybean mix, about 5 pounds an acre. It's coming up well. Hopefully it'll grow mostly straight up. I've heard canola tends to branch out and get kind of bushy, but hopefully it's dense enough, it'll want to train itself to just grow mostly straight up, and then maybe it'll lay over nicely with the rye and even the clover that's out there. And might have to roll it twice considering that, but it's just wait and see. I'm trying it on a few acres, so I'm excited about it.
So I'm going to bump past this slide because
Sure.
we've already spent a little bit of time talking about your inoculant project, but you can bring it back in here as we kind of wrap up and sum up. I'd like to leave a few minutes at the end for additional questions.
Yeah, right. Well, like I said, this is just a summary kind of what I've been talking about with maybe a few extra points. With this no-till soybeans, tweaking that rye and crimson mix and the rapeseed, I said, we'll see what happens. We might have to tweak it even more. Might back off on that rapeseed. I said, we're established really well. It'd be nice to have some equipment though. You know, when we're tweaking things, like to have a spreader or even an air seeder, which you can put on equipment, which runs off either electric or I think it's mostly electric, and it's just a fan that blows air into tubes, and the tubes are divided up along your piece of equipment for usually small seeds. So I imagine clovers and any other thing like that, where I could tweak a rate for a certain pass down the field with the drill. We get a lot of our small seeds aerial seeded first with an airplane that we drill over top of it because it doesn't need to go in deep. But when we're trying to do something specific or a couple different trials, don't have that option. The airplane can't really do that. We don't want them to. They probably won't want to fly for us anymore. So if we had that capability, it'd be nice to have a piece of equipment for that purpose. We'd like to look into more amendments to the field, like compost and the different drenches and some of the diversity with the inoculants. Focus on like a bacteria that specifically consumes biomass, plant material that might break down the cover crop in the corn, strip till corn ground, for example, to release more nutrients to fertilize the soil, fertilize the crop, and the soil too, I guess. Next thing is it's a new tool we've purchased, haven't used, is our weed zapper. And we're excited to see what that really does. And it might give us the chance to, even with some fields that are kind of you're on the line with, well, should we keep the cover crop if it's not looking too great, or terminate it early on in the season so we don't have a workload when we're planting. It might just, push us to keep it. We don't have to work the ground. We can still, we don't have to worry about the tillage of the ground. We can work on those soil health goals we're talking about. But we still have an answer for weeds that might come up in the rows with the soybeans that grow over top of the beans. In this bar, if people don't know, Weed Zapper electrocutes them, and it just rides along the top of the soybean plants. You can graze a few leaves here and there, it doesn't hurt the plant, but anything taller than soybeans, it'll electrify it and destroy most of what it touches. So it's a pretty neat tool. We're eager to see how it works next year.
I know, Aaron,
Caution with the zapper, the one weed it can't get is crabgrass.
That's right. That's not nice low growing stuff.
Yeah. So if you have a questionable stand of rye and you're rolling, I made the mistake this year on a lot of acres and crabgrass just took over. There was
I can imagine. It must have been fun combining too.
Yeah, it was a mess. Well, if frost out, it was fine, but
that's good. That's good. But I mean, just to end on kind of what Aaron's talking about, and you're having, or what I mentioned about having a good cover crop, but just find a way to establish an earlier, more uniform green manure cover crop, or just a cover crop for weed control in the no-till soybeans. So after the no-till soybeans come off, or while they're growing, it's hard to establish that cover crop for the corn the next year. You have all that cover still on the ground, and if you had your weeds under control, it just seems like we can't get a uniform stand by just flying on cover crop, or we have to come in and drill, which we did a lot of it this year. But we don't have many options. Aaron mentioned the clover doesn't do as well later in the season. We have peas. We're kind of working on that, seeing if we can get things managed well enough where we don't have a bunch of peas to worry about instead of crimson clover like we used to have when we're trying to take care of our fields. So it's going to be a challenge, but we're up to it.
Yeah, it's exciting, and I tell you what, in my view, particularly with what we've talked about today, farming is hard work. Organic farming adds a new layer of complexity, and then managing for soil health, like you and Aaron are both doing, it's a real hat tip for me and others in the community, because it's a win-win, I think, for the ag community and for the environment, and we really are appreciative of that sensitivity and work that you both are doing. Anybody have any final questions? We're right at 12:45, so I don't want to carry us on too longer, but I did want to entertain those if somebody has something they wanted to ask.
I must have covered everything very well. You did a great job.
You absolutely did. So there's my email address again, if somebody needs to circle back. I'm sure that both Steve and Aaron would be willing to try to, address specific questions if folks have them. It's not a private consultation, of course, because these guys are too busy for that. But if folks want to hear more about a particular thing that came up today or something that's been in your head, circle through me and I'll try to get you in touch. Beyond that, I wish everybody a wonderful holiday season. It's a busy time, and 2023 is going to just be here in a minute. So enjoy the last of this year, and my best wishes to everybody.
Well, thank you very much. This was great. Appreciate everybody who attended.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Stephen. Well done.
Thanks. Oh,
All right. Thanks, Steve. That was great.